This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
So let's go through and have a look at what I think is one of the more challenging standards within the syllabus. There's not a huge amount of rules within there. You will maybe find that there are other more challenging standards within the syllabus, but I always think that this one's just a little bit difficult to get your head around, and particularly as you then advance into SBR, your strategic business reporting paper, it can get quite tricky. But what we'll do is we'll make sure that we understand the basics with regards to the rules. We'll make sure that we can apply them, and then you should be in a reasonable position to then go through and answer any question that there is within the exam. In terms of how it could get examined, again, it could be a part of a Section C question on your individual published company accounts, whereby you may have to account for a non-current asset held for sale as part of PPE, or you might have to disclose the discontinued operation as part of the preparation of an individual company statement of profit or loss. And then it could be a multiple choice question in Section A. It could even be within Section B, where you have those 5 grouped together multiple choice questions covering a particular topic. You know, you could get an area that is dedicated to the entire IFRS 5 standard, so non-current assets held for sale and discontinued operations. And I think that's the important thing to think about, that this is one standard, but it's effectively got 2 aspects to it. The first aspect that we'll look at shortly is the non-current asset held for sale, and then there is this separate, although closely linked, idea of a discontinued operation. The non-current asset held for sale is effectively how we look at how things are presented on the statement of financial position when we've made the decision to sell an asset or a group of assets. And then a discontinued operation is when we've decided to close down a separate line of business, and therefore we need to separate out the results of what is discontinued and what is going to continue into the future within our statement of profit or loss. But maybe you can see the link quite clearly there. You know, if you're deciding to sell something, it might not necessarily be just an individual asset. It could be a group of assets, so that operation, and therefore that will then become a discontinued operation as well in the statement of profit or loss. But there's 2 bits to go through there and think about. Okay. So what have we got? Why are we going to do this? What's it all about? Because effectively it's a disclosure standard with some numbers attached. Okay. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to help the users of the accounts, to be able to identify what will be there next year and what won't be there next year. Because that's one of the limitations, isn't it, of financial statements. They're very much looking in the past, aren't they? Historic. But what about what's going to happen into the future? That's what investors want to be able to look at. That's what analysts want to be able to look at, isn't it? And therefore, it's going to be important that they can make an assessment of what's going to happen in the future. So if we go back and have a look, and I still think I've got the scribbles and bits and pieces within there. If we're going through and looking at it from a statement of financial position perspective, we're looking here at this level at an individual asset. You have an individual item of property, plant and equipment that you no longer require, and therefore you are going to sell it. Okay, so therefore you're going to transfer it down from non-current assets into non-current assets held for sale, a separate line item. Because then what you can see there is that when you're looking at your analysis, or maybe looking at your ratios, you've distinguished between what is going to be there next year in terms of your non-current asset balances, and then further down what won't be there potentially next year in terms of your non-current assets held for sale. Okay. Likewise as well, if we go back to our statement of profit or loss, we normally just see one column for all our revenue down to our net profit for the year. However, if we know that there is an operation within the business that is being wound down and that will not be there in the next accounting period, then that can meet the definition of a discontinued operation, and therefore we need to show the results separately. So you've got a detailed analysis at the top there of the continuing operations from your revenue down to your profit for the period from continuing operations. And then what you have here is then your profit or loss from the discontinued operations. And that will be all the results from the discontinued operations, such as revenues and costs, and also any profit or loss on disposal. Okay, and what you can then see is that of your total profit for the period, you can then see what's likely to arise next year and analyze the growth in those figures for next year from your continuing operations and see what isn't there next year with regards to your discontinued operations. So it's just giving the users of the accounts that little bit more information. Okay, and if you can stick with that in your mind in terms of the two different aspects. So what you see here on the statement of profit or loss and separating out the profits or losses on that discontinued operation from the continuing operation. And then looking at your statement of financial position as the disposal at this level of an individual asset. And that is then moved down from non-current down to its own separate non-current asset held for sale just after your current assets. If you can keep those two separate aspects in mind, it might help you go through there and understand a little bit better in terms of what we're about to do within the following videos.